We have everybody, and now we have sound. Hopefully everybody got a cup of coffee or a glass of water. The plenary sessions for each of these 3 mornings are set up around governance. And so today we'll hear from a national level of governance, tomorrow about indigenous governance, and then the third day local and subnational governance. And that when we think, one of the reasons for doing this is to really split out those layers and start to work to understand the individual interests, values of each, but also how they work together. And that it's at all those levels that we're able to move forward on any of the issues, either challenges or opportunities facing us. So this morning we have a great pleasure to have a wonderful panel in front of us. And I will turn over the moderating to Drue Pearce, who is the chair of the Institute of the North Board, former Senate president in Alaska, and a wonderful friend. Drue?
Thank you very much, Nils. Good morning. Thank you, Nils. Mr. President, thank you for the gracious welcome. Mr. Mayor, thank you. Mr. Ambassadors, distinguished guests, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Institute of the North and the other board members here and those who couldn't come, I want to welcome you to the 2013 Arctic Energy Summit. It is always a pleasure to get to come to Iceland. I first made the trip when Iceland was chair of the Arctic Council, and I was serving at the Department of Interior and was on part of the official delegation to Iceland, and I have very much enjoyed each and every trip that I've been lucky enough to get to make to this wonderful country. I'll talk briefly about the Institute of the North before introducing our distinguished panel. Governor Hickel, who you've heard about this morning, and we probably all have Wally stories to tell, was the founder of the Institute of the North, and he believed strongly that we must understand the reality and the richness and the responsibility of the North. And when I think about reality, responsibility, and richness, I think first of the people of the North, those who have made their home here for tens of thousands of years. Today, the Institute works to share his vision through an Arctic lens. Our mission is to inform public policy and cultivate an engaged citizenry, consistent with our focus on the North and our belief that commonly owned resources should be developed and managed for both individual and community prosperity. I met Governor Hickel soon after moving to Alaska. I listened to him. You couldn't help but listen to Wally. But I didn't truly understand the importance and significance of his vision until I lived north of the Arctic Circle myself. I was in Kotzebue starting in 1981, and that's north of the Arctic Circle on the western coast of Alaska. And there I learned that people cannot thrive without energy. Children should not go to school because that's where it's warm. And that's what happens in some of the rural communities, certainly that's what used to happen in some of the rural communities in Alaska. Communities cannot be resilient when they don't have energy or when that energy is too costly. So our panel this morning has been invited to discuss governance and their country's national interest and their approach, each of them, to energy and sustainable development for the people of the North and also for their countries. I'm going to introduce each one and have them give their remarks, and then after each has had an opportunity to speak, we will take questions and answers and have a discussion. We are going to start with our Icelandic representative. Minister Ragnheiður Elín is Ministry of Industry and Innovation here in Iceland. She became minister in May of 2013. The minister is MP of the Independence Party, and she served as chairman of the party caucus from 2010 to 2012. After graduating from the Women's College in Reykjavik, she completed a BA degree from the University of Iceland in 1991 and subsequently an MS in International Relations from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. From 1995 to 98, she worked for the Icelandic Export Council. The minister was assistant to the Minister of Finance in 98 through 2005, and then assistant to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister's assistant also in 2006 and 2007. It's my pleasure to welcome the Minister of Industry and Commerce for Iceland.
Mr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, President of Iceland, ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to give you some of our reflections on the Arctic energy issues. The awareness and importance of the Arctic region in international affairs has increased considerably in recent years on account of a debate about climate change and new shipping routes, natural resources, and continental shelf claims. Moreover, the Arctic is becoming increasingly important in its strategic, security, and economic dimension. The Arctic ecosystem is fragile, and utilization of its natural resources is subject to various political, economic, environmental, and social conditions. The area holds huge potential natural resources ranging from minerals, hydrocarbons, and marine life for food production. For example, it has been estimated that the Arctic region holds approximately 30% of the world's unexploited gas and 13% of unexploited oil. Utilization of resources and environmental changes in the Arctic region will clearly have a major impact on economic and social conditions of the inhabitants in this area. Iceland is an Arctic state, a member of the Arctic Council. It goes without saying that Arctic issues are of great importance for Iceland, and we are heavily dependent on the resources of the Arctic region in all of our main industries, including fisheries, tourism, and energy. The Icelandic Parliament unanimously adopted an Arctic policy in the last term, which states our vision towards the Arctic. This includes that Iceland supports the Arctic Council as the main collaborative forum in Arctic matters. Secondly, that Iceland wants to secure its position as an Arctic coastal state, and that we want to build on the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea for resolving disputes. Thirdly, to strengthen collaboration with our closest neighbors in the Arctic, being Greenland and the Faroe Islands, and to secure rights of indigenous peoples living in the High North and preserve their unique culture. And finally, we want to prevent, as far as possible, human-induced climate change and ensure that increased economic activity will contribute to sustainable utilization of resources and preserve the fragile ecosystem. The Arctic Council, with its 8 member states, is the most important forum for international cooperation on Arctic issues and plays a key role. Since the Council was founded in 1996, it has evolved in a very positive way from being a discussion forum towards becoming a regional treaty-based organization. As clearly stated in the aforementioned Arctic policy, Iceland is among the countries that want to increase the Arctic Council's weight and relevance in decisions on the region where necessary. The importance and value of the Arctic Council is also evident when measured by the interests of new countries seeking membership or observer status. 6 countries were granted observer status earlier this year, including China. Iceland supported this, and I believe that this will only strengthen the Arctic Council as a growing governing body in the region. Currently, all parties subscribe to the overarching framework of the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, although the US has not ratified it yet. And despite some relatively minor territorial and definitional disputes, bilateral and multilateral negotiations have been extremely cooperative. We should place trust in the work of the Arctic Council in addressing the various challenges of the Arctic, and we should, as much as possible, take active part in the various work which is currently being undertaken by the Arctic Council. In this respect, I would specifically like to mention the oil spill agreement, which was signed at the Arctic Council ministerial meeting in Kiruna in May of this year. This is an important agreement which underpins the role of the Arctic Council in safeguarding environmental and civil security in the region in terms of utilization of hydrocarbons in the Arctic. Another important agreement, and the first legally binding agreement of the Arctic Council, is the 2011 Agreement on Search and Rescue, which was signed by the ministers in Nuuk. Ladies and gentlemen, Iceland does have unique strengths, which we want to bring to the Arctic table. I would like to mention renewable energy, both geothermal and hydro, where Iceland can provide knowledge and long experience in the utilization of our energy resources. Sustainable fisheries and fish processing are also areas where we have gained significant experience and success in the past decades. Here we can contribute. Also in infrastructure, transportation and information technology, and then, of course, with the location of Iceland as an ideal service center for many future Arctic cooperative endeavors, such as a conference or summit we are witnessing here in Akureyri today. In this field, as in others, we, the Arctic countries, can certainly learn from each other and build on each other's strengths and experience in tackling the tasks of tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, speaking as the Minister of Industry and Energy, I would like to mention the potentials and challenges within the field of hydrocarbons in the Arctic region and how we can address the issue in a responsible manner. I hope and believe that in Iceland we will, in the coming years, witness the birth of a new industry, which could turn out to have a major impact on future generations. This is the oil and gas industry and the related service industry. As Iceland is now embarking upon exploration of oil and gas on the Jan Mayen Ridge area, northeast of the country, cooperation on various issues with our Arctic neighbors, for example in the field of preventing oil pollution, becomes of paramount importance for us in the years to come. The signing of the aforementioned Kiruna oil spill agreement was an important milestone. This area, the Drue area, is a frontier area with many challenges, but also great potentials. The Icelandic government has stated that it will encourage the utilization of potential oil and gas resources as soon as practicable, should these be discovered in sufficient quantity to make extraction feasible. To this end, the government will undertake preparatory work in connection with transport, accident prevention and rescue work, environmental protection, infrastructure, cooperation with neighboring countries, and regulatory issues. The government will also establish a state oil company, which will have the purpose of administering licenses for oil and gas production and to lay the basis for ensuring that potential benefit from such production is utilized by society as a whole and on a long-term basis. This year, we have issued 2 licenses for exploration and production of hydrocarbons in the Drue area, and the third is in process. Various investment opportunities are arising through this new sector. In addition to this, I see a growing role for Iceland in servicing what we can call the energy triangle, which is the Icelandic area south of Jan Mayen, the Norwegian part of it, and the oil exploration areas off the east coast of Greenland. Nevertheless, it's important to have both feet firmly on the ground and approach these issues of the future in a sensible and responsible manner, and that is what we intend to do. In this regard, of course, I would like to stress once again the need to have a close cooperation with our Arctic neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, the Arctic is one of the last frontiers of unspoiled land on the planet. Exercising caution in the Arctic is not to be questioned. Past history shows that unconstrained access to natural resources can lead to overexploitation and environmental disasters. The Arctic is, and has always been in many ways, a friendly place. However, even if most analysts and governments agree that the Arctic is currently a low-tension area, There are some concerns, and we have to keep our eyes open towards changes in that respect. In order to maintain a low-tension environment, we must ensure that military activities, often justified on a national security basis, do not appear provocative to any Arctic state. The aim is, to quote the former Norwegian Foreign Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, high north, low tension. And that is what it should continue to be. That was the vision of Vilhjálmur Stefánsson, the Arctic explorer who was born in 1879, and after whom we named our Arctic institution here in Akureyri. One of his objectives was to change the ideas prevailing through the centuries about the hostile Arctic and draw attention to the fact that it's the home to people and that it has hosted its own culture for centuries. The Arctic can be a very friendly place and rewarding place, especially if we are friendly to that. This we should always keep in mind. Thank you for your attention and wish you good luck and success in your continuing work here at this summit.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll move to the U.S. Ambassador to Iceland, Ambassador Luis Arriaga. He was nominated by President Barack Obama as ambassador on April 22, 2010, and was confirmed by the Senate in August of 2010, and then sworn in and came to present his credentials to President Grimson just 10 days later in September of 2010. The ambassador is a career member of the Foreign Service with the rank of Minister Counselor. Before his nomination as ambassador to the Republic of Iceland, he led State Department efforts to recruit and hire the largest increase in Foreign Service personnel in U.S. State Department history. He previously served as Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Panama, U.S. Consul General in Vancouver, Canada, and as Director of the Executive Secretariat staff at the Department of State in D.C. He was born and raised in Guatemala before immigrating to the United States. He is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, where he received a PhD in economics and a master's degree in management. We are so very pleased, and it's my honor to introduce to you Ambassador Luis Arriaga from the United States.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Mr. President, distinguished panelists, distinguished participants in this conference, friends all. Before I start, let me offer a special word of thanks to the organizers of this event, the Institute of the North, Orkustofnun. Gudni, I thought you'd be proud of my pronunciation of that word, and of course, the Arctic Portal. It is always a pleasure, Eric, to be in this beautiful city of Akureyri. You know that, and it's great to be here, and this time of the year especially is very nice. I don't think I need to convince anyone that the United States, like other Arctic countries, are feeling the impact of the melting of the polar ice. And in fact, the highest levels of the U.S. government have recognized the need to refocus our efforts to respond to the challenges and opportunities posed by these developments. In May of this year, the National Strategy for the Arctic region laid out broad U.S. goals. Our key priorities in the strategy is to strengthen our international partnerships through existing multilateral structures and legal frameworks, but also to pursue new opportunities for cooperation. Underpinning that strategy is the theme of unity of effort, something that I think has been demonstrated by the United States government support for the Arctic Council and by at least two of the agreements that have been signed, the Arctic Search and Rescue that was mentioned and the Marine Oil Pollution Agreement. Now, with respect to oil and gas development, the strategy recognizes that the Arctic region holds sizable oil and gas resources that will continue to provide supplies to meet U.S. energy needs. But it also recognizes that it poses unique challenges for both the extraction and the disaster preparedness to deal with it. So the U.S. strategy, in terms of, it's dedicated to ensuring that energy development in the Arctic is environmentally sustainable, takes into account, and this is very important, the interests of indigenous and local communities, and respects open and transparent market principles. Now, from a domestic policy perspective, we do have some coordinating challenges, as we have more than 20 federal agencies that have responsibility over the U.S. Arctic. They have responsibility over issues such as resource management, scientific research, homeland security, emergency preparedness and response, maritime and aviation security, support for local communities, and the list goes on. Now, to these 20-plus agencies, we had to add to the mix state agencies, tribal governments, Alaska Native organizations, municipal governments, industrial and commercial stakeholders, as well as conservation organizations. So you can imagine each of these stakeholders brings a very unique perspective to the table. But I think the one thing that we can say safely is that there is a collective interest in supporting a stable economic development, thriving cultures, and sustainable ecosystems in the Arctic. Now, how do these consultative mechanisms work? Well, they try to respect a certain set of basic principles. One, whole-of-government coordination to improve operational certainty. Two, direct and meaningful partnership between stakeholders, and that includes governments. Three, science-based decision-making focusing on ensuring sustainable ecosystems. Four, adaptive approaches, and this has been mentioned already, by ongoing research and monitoring activities. Region-wide planning that spans jurisdictional boundaries, and improve understanding and consideration of the cumulative impacts of human activities in the region. At a much broader level, the Arctic cooperation has assumed a significantly higher profile in the United States in recent years, as evidenced by the participation of Secretary Clinton and Secretary Kerry in the last two ministerial summits in Nuuk and in Kiruna. Now, U.S. policy calls for strong cooperation among Arctic Council countries, particularly that related to economic development, environmental protection, and sustainability, and indigenous people's interests. This is a theme that we keep coming back to. But we also want to ensure that the Arctic Council does not add unnecessary layers of bureaucracy, because the fact is this is a particularly important issue, because increasing levels of human activity in the Arctic will be imposing additional strains on an already challenged infrastructure. So our mandate is to improve the way that governments and stakeholders work together to achieve sustainable development without additional unnecessary layers or organizational overload. And in doing so, our challenge is how to apply the principles of integrated Arctic management to today's decisions and to those that lie ahead in our shared future as Arctic nations. Let me stop there and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Next, we will turn to Canada. All of you know, I'm sure, that Canada took the chairmanship of the Arctic Council at the Kiruna Ministerial in May. We've come full circle. This is Canada's second time chairing the Council. We have with us today Deputy Minister Patrick Borby from the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency. But Patrick had the wonderful opportunity to be in the right place at the right time. He was appointed president of CanNor, which is the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency, back in December of 2011. But in March of 2013, he was appointed chair of the Arctic Council's senior Arctic officials, commonly and known as the SOWs, for Canada's 2-year term as the chair of the Arctic Council, which will extend, of course, until May of 2015, when the U.S. will take its second turn as chair. So as chair of the senior Arctic officials, Mr. Borby will work closely with all of the other Arctic officials from all 8 Arctic states, as well as the permanent participants and the official observers, 6 Indigenous PPs, in managing all of the activities of the Arctic Council. Prior to joining CanNor, Mr. Borby held the position of Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Treaties and Aboriginal Government and Assistant Deputy Minister of Northern Affairs at the Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada. He's originally from Elliott Lake in Northern Ontario, and he holds a Bachelor of Arts in Social Sciences and a Master's of Business Administration from the University of Ottawa. So it's with great pleasure that we invite our Canadian to the podium, Minister Borby.
Thank you, Drue. Mr. President, Minister, Mr. Mayor, ambassadors, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the 2013 Arctic Energy Summit here in this beautiful city of Akureyri. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of the Honourable Leona Aglukkaq, Minister of the Environment, Minister of the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency, and Minister for the Arctic Council. With an overarching theme of energy as a fundamental element of the sustainable development of the Arctic as a lasting frontier, this conference addresses 3 thematic areas: richness, resilience, and responsibility. As the chair of the Arctic Council's senior Arctic officials, I will frame my remarks within the context of the role of the Arctic Council on energy and Canada's current chairmanship of the Council from 2013 to 2015. But first, I will start by saying that the themes of this conference are fully aligned with Canada's vision for the Arctic, which is a stable, rules-based region with defined boundaries, characterized by dynamic economic growth with vibrant communities living in healthy ecosystems. This vision underscores the Government of Canada's commitment to working with all stakeholders, including provincial and territorial governments and Aboriginal groups, to balance economic, social, and environmental considerations in the development of Canada's energy resources. Now I would like to turn more specifically to the topic of this session, energy as a fundamental element of sustainable development of the Arctic, and in particular, oil and gas development. This is a vital sector attracting high public interest and attention. It is also an area in which the Arctic Council has long undertaken significant work with the aim of helping to ensure that resource development in this unique Arctic region proceeds in a responsible manner. The International Energy Agency projects global energy demand will increase by more than 1/3 by 2035. Significantly, the agency also projects that 25 years from now, even under the most optimistic scenarios for the development of alternative energy sources, the world will still likely rely on fossil fuels for 63% of its energy needs. Given this growing energy demand, energy extraction from remote and unconventional energy sources, such as those found in the Arctic, will be needed. Oil and gas exploration and development activity in the Arctic region is therefore expected to increase in the coming decades, and while such activity will bring economic growth and opportunities to northern populations, it will also bring increased risks of oil spills from offshore oil and gas operations and from shipping. And this is raising concerns about possible negative impacts on the fragile Arctic environment and on the people who live there. However, despite these concerns, a consistent thread in my minister's consultations with our northern and Arctic communities shows that they recognize the important role that energy and other extractive resources can contribute to their economic development, but in return, they have also emphasized that it must be done right. As you know, it's estimated that nearly 25% of the global undiscovered hydrocarbon reserves can be found in the Arctic region. It is further estimated that the region may contain 13% of the world's technically recoverable oil, 30% of its technically recoverable natural gas, and significant quantities of natural gas liquids. And as I understand it, these projections do not take into account possible reserves of shale gas and tight oil. However, it is clear that there are significant challenges in accessing Arctic resources. The fact that over 80% of these resources are located offshore raises the prospects of high costs and increased risks presented by stormy seas, ice shelves and icebergs, strong winds, months of darkness, and isolated locations with limited infrastructure. Considering the consequences of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, in an easier operating environment, the prospects of increased offshore Arctic drilling has understandably led to heightened concerns. Indeed, in many places in the world today, there is growing public interest, sensitivity, and concern about the impact that increased oil and gas activity may have on fragile ecosystems. And no ecosystem is more fragile than the Arctic. This is why the Chair and CEO of Canada's National Energy Board recently reiterated that the Board puts safety and environmental protection at the forefront of its responsibilities in protecting Canadians and requires any company planning to operate in the Canadian Arctic to demonstrate that they can operate safely while protecting the environment. If the company can't do this, they can't operate. And the same holds true for Canada's liability regime for companies operating in Canada's offshore waters, which is founded on the polluter pays principle and which is currently in the process of being updated and modified. No development will proceed unless companies can show that they can meet their liability requirements. These principles have been endorsed by our Minister of Natural Resources, who has said that oil and gas development would only proceed if it is safe for our communities and safe for the environment. Fortunately, oil and gas development has been on the radar of the Arctic Council from its inception in 1996. For example, the Council first produced its Arctic offshore oil and gas guidelines in 1997 in response to the report of the Third Ministerial Conference on the Protection of the Arctic Environment, which was held in Inuvik, Canada, in March 1996. The guidelines were intended to be used by Arctic states during the planning, exploration, development, production, and decommissioning phases of offshore oil and gas operations. They aimed to define a set of recommended practices and outline strategic actions for consideration by those responsible for regulation of offshore oil and gas activities in each Arctic state. The original 1997 guidelines have been further developed and updated over the years, most recently in 2009. This now very substantial set of voluntary guidelines, running to 90 pages in the 2009 version, is the result of extensive consultations between relevant Arctic Council working groups, including the Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment, PAME, the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, AMAP, Emergency Prevention, Preparedness and Response, EPPR, and the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna, CAF. As a result, the oil and gas guidelines truly cover the waterfront of related activities with chapters that deal with Arctic communities, Indigenous peoples, sustainability and conservation of flora and fauna, environmental impact assessments, environmental monitoring, safety and environmental management, operating practices, and emergencies. As well, the fourth ministerial meeting of the Arctic Council, which met in Reykjavik in 2004, led to an updated assessment on oil and gas activities in the Arctic. That report, released in 2007 by the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, contains a comprehensive assessment of the environmental, social, and economic and human health impacts of oil and gas activities in the Arctic. Its recommendations continue to guide the work of the Arctic Council today. More recently, the Arctic Council has completed a report summarizing current knowledge and expertise on the behavior of hazardous substances in Arctic waters in order to promote the development of technologies and methods that will improve our ability to respond to accidents involving oil and other noxious substances. The benefits of Arctic Council-initiated regional collaboration on oil and gas development over the years has been substantial. But the game is changing, and interest from both Arctic and non-Arctic states is growing exponentially. So it is incumbent to us to ensure that we have a viable framework in place for responsible resource development in the Arctic, and that we deal appropriately with public perceptions. In short, we need to ensure that we are ready for and up to the challenge. Ensuring that development in the North is sustainable and responsible is indeed a high priority for the Arctic Council, as seen in two recent initiatives, one on oil spill preparedness and response, and the other on oil spill prevention. Both of these initiatives were mandated by ministers at the Arctic Council ministerial meeting in May 2011 in Nuuk, and their outcomes were endorsed by ministers at the Arctic Council ministerial meeting in Kiruna just this past May. The Task Force on Oil Spill Preparedness and Response developed a new international instrument to enhance cooperation and coordination amongst Arctic states in the event of an oil spill. The Agreement on Cooperation on Marine Oil Pollution Preparedness and Response in the Arctic is only the second legally binding agreement reached under the auspices of the Arctic Council after the 2011 Arctic State and Arctic Search and Rescue Agreement. The objective of the agreement is to provide mutual assistance among the 8 Arctic states in the event of an oil spill exceeds one state's capacity to respond. To achieve this objective, the agreement includes requirements to, for example, undertake monitoring in the Arctic, report incidents, notify other states of incidents, participate in joint training and exercises, and share relevant information to enhance oil spill response operations. The agreement also codifies procedures for Arctic states to request assistance from other states when necessary to respond effectively to a spill. This aspect is particularly important because it is of mutual advantage to all Arctic states to be able to react quickly, to share expertise and work collaboratively in response to spill incidents given the unique conditions of the North. This new agreement is an important step that will strengthen regional governance and cooperation amongst Arctic states in an area of vital importance. It also helps to build public confidence that we are taking the measures needed to ensure that Arctic resource development proceeds responsibly and that proper contingencies are in place in the event of any spill. Canada was pleased to lead the development of the operational guidelines to support the new agreement and will host the first international exercise under the agreement aimed at testing our notification procedures, likely in the summer of 2014. Future national, binational, and multinational contingency plans, training, and exercises will further develop effective response measures. Of course, preventing oil spills in the first place is the primary goal of responsible resource development. We're all acutely aware that a potential oil spill could have serious impacts on the environment and the livelihoods of Arctic residents. Recognizing this, the Nuuk Ministerial called for the development of a set of best practices in the prevention of marine oil pollution. Unlike the existing oil and gas guidelines, which I mentioned earlier, the Arctic Council's Oil Spill Prevention Initiative casts the net more widely, covering the oil and gas industry, but also transport, tourism, and potential coastal sources of oil spills, for example, coastal community oil storage tanks. In addition, a maritime surveillance component was included as an important prevention measure. This initiative was pursued within the Emergency Preparedness, Prevention and Response Working Group through the recommended practices in the prevention of marine oil pollution in the Arctic project, or commonly known as the RP3 project, chaired by Norway and Canada. A benefit of carrying out this project under the auspices of the Arctic Council was that the Council was able to access the full range of experience, knowledge, and scientific understanding of each Arctic state, including regulators, industry, academia, and other stakeholders, and as well as select experts from beyond the region. A detailed technical report was developed, the report on recommended practices for Arctic oil spill prevention. The recommended practices identified in the report represent a key step towards a better understanding of state-of-the-art prevention practices that can be put in place across the Arctic region, and takes us further towards a collective goal of ensuring that future Arctic oil and gas development is undertaken safely and responsibly. At the Kiruna ministerial meeting, the Arctic ministers welcomed the RP3 report and encouraged Arctic states to pursue further work in the recommended areas. The ministers also decided to establish a task force to develop an Arctic Council action plan and other arrangements on marine oil pollution prevention, and to present the outcomes of its work and any recommendations for further action at the next ministerial meeting in Canada in mid-2015. The new task force, which is co-chaired by Norway and Russia, will consider what measures and actions could be undertaken to prevent future spills and how these could be advanced by the Arctic Council collectively or Arctic states individually. The scope of this prevention work will be discussed by the task force participants at their first meeting in November 2013. During our term as chair, Canada will work with other Arctic states and the permanent participants within the task force to achieve concrete outcomes on oil spill prevention, as an important and necessary complement to the new agreement in the area of oil spill preparedness and response. I trust that my presentation has given you some insights into the importance that the Arctic Council and more broadly on the management of the Arctic region and its important work in oil and gas sector. The sector will be critical to the economic development of the Arctic region. The actions that we are taking now to support a responsible approach to resource development will hopefully pay dividends to the people of the Arctic for decades to come. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. Last but not least, we bring to the podium someone from a non-Arctic country, but a country with many interests in the Arctic. We have with us Ambassador Thomas Meister from the Embassy of Germany here in Iceland. He's an economist by trade, but he began foreign service for Germany in 1981. And he has alternated postings both home in the Federal Foreign Office and also abroad in a number of fascinating places, including Canberra, Austria, Uganda, New York City, Brazil, and Spain. And then in 2009, he became ambassador for Germany to New Zealand, and from New Zealand came to Iceland in 2012 and is now the ambassador to the Republic of Iceland from Germany. And we look forward to his comments about energy and the national interests in the Arctic.
Mr. President, ministers, fellow ambassadors, Mr. Mayor, Your Worship, distinguished guests, you might ask yourself, why would a German ambassador speak on an Arctic energy summit? Well, I would say it's all a matter of perspectives. As you, Drue, kindly mentioned, I was posted from New Zealand to Iceland, and I previously had a posting in Australia. In both places down under, in Australia and in New Zealand, Germany frequently was referred to as a Northern European country. You know, Germans would rather consider themselves as Central Europeans, but from the down under perspective, we are Northern European, maybe also in an Arctic perspective. Energy-wise, you know, Germany is quite a fascinating country because we are undergoing now something which is referred to as the Energiewende. This word, the energy transition, Energiewende, has already been entered into the English language. And of course, it means the famous phase-out decision by 2022 to phase out the nuclear power plants that we had. This decision was taken only in 2011 after the Fukushima event, but it had a long history, obviously, going back to the 70s, the first oil energy crisis, the Chernobyl disaster, etc. So it had been a long discussion in Germany, and eventually in 2011 we made this decision, meaning that we have to promote renewable energies. as our foremost form of energy. And unlike Iceland, Germany, of course, is not blessed with renewable energies. On the contrary, on fossil fuels, we have to import 90% of our gas and 85% of our gas and 95% of our oil. So we're really dependent on many other parts of the world. But we're doing quite well. Renewable energies are going forward, and I'm very grateful to the organizers of this event to give me the opportunity to bring an exhibition which is just outside this conference hall on renewables made in Germany by our German Energy Agency. This exhibition actually highlights the various forms of renewable energies, not just geothermal and hydro that you know very, very well in Iceland, but also photovoltaics, solar thermal, biomass, etc. Quite a fascinating range of renewables available. Now, on the Arctic, obviously, we also see the great potential for the economies of Germany and Europe that the Arctic resources hold. At the same time, of course, major ecological challenges must be met by enforcing the highest environmental standards when developing these resources. And this message also should be a recurring theme of my exposé. That's including, of course, maintaining Arctic biodiversity. Germany has vast knowledge in the areas of research, technology, and environmental standards that we contribute to the Arctic developments. As we already heard, also especially in the most recent contribution, the Arctic holds sizable oil and gas reserves, but as well as mineral resources. And the German perspective, another German perspective, is that the summer ice cap has shrunk by an area equivalent to 4 times the size of Germany only in recent years. So that is quite important to know for Germans as well. Now, we have a high profile in polar research, a strong political engagement, and an active participation in discussions. And that's why we consider ourselves as well an actor in the High North. Germany has recently hosted 3 major Arctic conferences in Berlin and one together with our Norwegian and Denmark friends in Copenhagen and in Oslo. What are the opportunities we are looking at? Again, the fossil fuels that have been already mentioned, but there's also a range of metals that one is looking at: copper, nickel, zinc, and rare earth. And this also could render an important contribution to the energy of supplies of German industries. Just to mention, turning back to the fossil fuels, that our main sources for gas and oil are actually Norway and Russia, in both cases above 30% each of oil and gas. So we are dependent on countries who do a lot of exploration in the High North. New opportunities also for German companies in the maritime field, and we recently developed a master plan in 2011 to unlock the full potential of these technologies. Germany's role in scientific research. Germany is internationally recognized and active in a wide range of Arctic research activities. The Alfred Wegener Institute is known to all of you, and I hear that the director, Frau Lochte, will be in Reykjavik for the Arctic Circle Conference later this week. German institutes participate in research programs of the EU, the Nordic Council and the Arctic Council, and the European Polar Board consists of a group of experts of the European Science Foundation. Mr. Borby also mentioned the Arctic Council, and in Germany's view, the most central body for the Arctic policy is indeed the Arctic Council. It's becoming more and more institutionalized, and the issues to deal with are broadening in scope. Germany is prepared to do its share as an observer country, and the federal government is also interested in increasing our participation on an ad hoc basis in Arctic Council working groups. Just one word on the European Union. In 2012, the European Union launched its approach for systematic EU Arctic policies. And this is to be conducted in close coordination with the Northern Dimension policy. The European Union has submitted its candidacy as an observer status for observer status in the Arctic Council, and I think this is well deserved because for some time now it has been provided substantial funds for polar research, some 200 million euros over the past 10 years, and it's supporting sustainable development, for example, in Greenland. Germany also advocates a stronger engagement by the European Investment Bank in parts of the Arctic, particularly in the domains of energy, environmental, transport, and research infrastructure. At this stage, once again, thanks to the organizers for giving us the opportunity to present our exhibition here outside the conference room. It is 26 panels on the different forms of renewable energies, as I mentioned at the outset, and it also answers the question, what can Germany contribute to the development of renewable energies? I've already elaborated on the nuclear issue in Germany. Just in summary, with its know-how in cutting-edge research, sophisticated technology, and high environmental standards, Germany is in a position to support sustainable economic development in the Arctic. And I'm meant to conclude, Your Excellency, Mr. President, by quoting from your Salichat speech in Russia 2 weeks ago, when you said that the debate should not be dominated by disputes over drilling and oil and gas, but also focusing on the renewable chances, the clean energy chances for the Arctic region. But you've put this even more eloquently today, so I wouldn't take this quote forward. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. So we've had 4 excellent presentations, and we have a very distinguished panel, and this is your opportunity to have the chance to ask questions of the panel or make any comments to the topic that both sides. And if you have a question or a comment, I'd ask that you say your name and your affiliation, and if it's directed at a particular minister or ambassador, if you'd please let them know. If not, we'll let them decide who's going to take the question. Any questions from the audience or comments? Can't be this quiet a group this time of morning. Yes. Would you go to the microphone, please? Over in the, can you see it standing in the front? Thank you.
Yes, my name is Rasmus Bertelsen from Aalborg University, Denmark. We talked a lot about energy resources in the north, of course, but I'd like the panel to elaborate on how are you going to ensure that local communities are going to benefit from these energy resources? Because there is a strong history of rents and income leaving the Arctic, that there are strong resources in the region, natural resources, energy, but that the rents have left the region. So how are you going to ensure that the local communities benefit from these resources? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who wants to take it?
Is it working? Yeah. I'll take a shot at that one. I'll look at it more from a Canadian perspective, because that's where my experience is. In northern Canada, we have settled our land claims, and we have self-government agreements with the majority of our Aboriginal people. So we also have a regulatory system that is co-managed, and therefore the Aboriginal people and the local communities have a fairly direct voice and involvement in any new projects, resource or otherwise. So that provides a fair amount of influence for local communities to be able to determine whether projects go ahead and under what conditions. They are also participants in the rents that are generated through this activity in a number of ways. One is, as part of the land claim, they selected ownership of lands that contain significant potential for oil and gas or minerals. So the royalties that will be generated through the development of those lands will go directly to the Aboriginal people and will be invested in those local communities. There's also a requirement for impact benefit agreements that are part of the land claim system. Therefore, each company has to negotiate an agreement with the local communities, the Aboriginal organizations, and be able to specifically commit to benefits, jobs, business development opportunities, community investments. So those are some ways that we can see some direct benefits for local communities. The other opportunity is when a major project, whether it's hydro or wind, and it's to look at those projects in terms of not only the benefits that can be generated for reducing the cost for, let's say, a mining operation, but also how we can improve the energy self-sufficiency of communities. So we have examples, for example, of a hydro project where there was an expansion to meet the needs of a mine, but at the same time the conditions were that the local community had to be connected to the grid, and therefore went from dependence on diesel power generation to hydro, which is much cleaner and much cheaper. And of course, we know what cheaper electrical or power rates also generates opportunities for more economic development. When we look at the cost per kilojoule of power in Canada's north, it is a real break to economic opportunity. Not only is it a huge cost for communities and for individuals, but it also prevents a lot of small businesses from being competitive.
Anyone else?
Just to add a few words regarding the way from the Icelandic perspective. As I said in my remarks, we just agreed upon in the last term in the Parliament on an Arctic policy, which was quite an accomplishment considering that we did not agree on anything on the last term in Icelandic politics. So this was one of the pleasant exceptions. One of the main focus in that policy is to stand guard and ensure the right of the indigenous people of the High North. So that is one of our focus. And regarding the potential oil exploration that we are entering into, it is clearly stated that we are now establishing the sort of state oil company to have the framework to be particularly aware of that the benefits and the rewards that possibly come out of this will benefit the population as a whole and on a long-term basis.
Yes, I cannot comment specifically as to how we're going to do it in Alaska. I think I have colleagues here who are in a much better position to do that. But I would only address for a number of ingredients at play in the United States. Number one, Alaska has a strong tradition of sharing the resources, and they have a model that has worked quite well for them. Two, we have the indigenous communities in Alaska are very active, they're very strong, and they're participating. And three, we do have a federal policy that recognizes the need to take into account and to give participation to the indigenous communities. And my expectation would be that all of these ingredients will result in a policy that addresses what you're suggesting. I don't know whether there's anyone from the Alaska perspective that wishes to comment on that.
Also, just to show that observer countries also care, Germany a couple of weeks ago published its Arctic policy guidelines, and to quote just one line out of those guidelines, it says, we recognize the special situation of indigenous people in the Arctic and campaign for the protection of their right of free and self-determined life in their homeland. Thank you.
And from the U.S. side, we have with us here, and I'm sure willing to talk to all of you about what's happening in Alaska, the co-chairs of the Alaska Arctic Policy Commission, Senator Lisa McGuire, Representative Bob Herron. The state will have its own written Arctic policy at the end of this process. We also have one of the other members of the board of the Institute of the North with us, Teresa M. from the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation. That's just one of the 13 regional corporations that were established by native claim settlements in Alaska, and that company has both land rights and also interests in energy development in Alaska to bring the income and the rents back to the people of Alaska. So there are a number of people here who can talk about our system. Other questions? Yes? Microphone, please.
I'm Nils Andreas Masvi. I'm with the DNV GL. And that's the merger approved a month ago between DNV and the GL. This is a question for Minister Arnardóttir. You mentioned licensing in the Icelandic offshore areas with the parliamentary elections in Norway and government negotiations. There has been a moratorium on some of the areas. Would you like to comment upon the effect that might have on Iceland? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and congratulations on your new government. As a member of the Høyre's sister party, I'm very happy to see them in government again. Although I have to say that I was a bit taken aback with that condition that they agreed upon. But regarding first of all, the third licensing that we are expecting to give out or have the Power Authority give out later, hopefully this month. And now I'm looking at the Director General of the Power Authority. I don't think it has been stated by the Norwegian authorities or soon-to-be authorities that they will not enter or participate in that third licensing as they have done with the previous two. That remains to be seen. But regarding the fact that their position that has been claimed, that is not going to have a direct result on our activities there. We will continue. Of course, we would have wanted to see our friends from Norway participate alongside our activities, but this is not going to stop or halt in any way our plans in the region.
Question?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my name's Frank Polkak. I'm with the Renewable Game Council, and I think I have a question for Pat. Maybe I don't know if you could, Patrick, from Canada. You mentioned that one of the things that Canada is looking at is training and exercises for oil spill and that in the Arctic. And I live where there's potential, a lot of oil and gas offshore where I live. Taktoyaktak, you know that for sure. And right now there's a proposal in front, or Imperial Oil is interested in drilling on a far offshore. And we just received their application through the screening committee. My question, I guess, is, we're always hearing that the northern communities are going to be the first responders if any disaster or anything ever happens. And you mentioned that there may be training and exercises done for oil spill. And I was wondering when will that start taking place? Because, we're always being told that the communities are going to be the first responders. And we did have a small exercise in my community, I think it was 2 years ago, with the Coast Guard. And we trained at least 12 people, but that's not nearly enough to clean up even a small oil spill. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about the exercise and training.
Yes, thank you for that question, and certainly I want to recognize that the people of the North will be at the front line. Of course, the first impacted by any incident and the first interested to be involved in making sure that it doesn't happen, or that there is the right solutions brought to bear to immediately clean up and contain the situation. And so therefore working with your people, the people in the Nuvia region, is very important. The exercise I was referring to is at this point a tabletop exercise, the very first one. So it won't involve actually putting assets on the ground or in the water to be able to do further testing. That will have to come a little bit later. So the first level will be simply a virtual tabletop exercise involving all the 8 Arctic states. But as we are planning to do that, and we still have quite a long time before next summer to be able to plan it, we need to bring all our partners into that process. And of course, through the ICC, the Nunavut are very well represented at the Arctic Council and through the working groups. So again, hopefully we have time to prepare for this. We're talking about no drilling likely to happen in Canada's Arctic until 2020, and that's based on the new proposal that has been received from Imperial to get ready for exploratory drilling. The seismic has been completed, so they need to go the next step. So we have a number of years to be able to further follow up on your very good points. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for that. But as you know, 2020 is only 7 years from now, and things happen very quickly. And I think we have to be prepared prior to that. So I think you have to start the training as soon as you can. Because there's always if an accident never happened in Alaska, you can utilize these people that are trained to go over there to assist. We did that with the Valdez in the 70s, late 70s and 80s. We had people trained in our region, and they did go over there to assist. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure we have people from Alaska Clean Seas who'd be happy to come from Prudhoe Bay over to do some training. Do we have a question here? Do you have a question? And we'll take one and then another one, and then I think it's time to go to lunch.
Irina Kim, University of Copenhagen and University of Iceland. I have a question for the Minister of Industry and Innovation. You have mentioned that the government has plans to create a national oil company. Could you please tell a little bit more about those plans, and especially about how the government's views on how to distribute or share the liability for the potential catastrophes in oil and gas sector? Thank you.
The national oil company that is stated in the coalition platform agreement that we will establish, and we have already started the preparatory work, is more or less set out for the regulatory framework. It is not for the extraction or the drilling part, but it's more to set up the regulatory system and framework and get our bureaucracy prepared for what may come in years to come. We realize that this is a long-term project, but it's something that we need to be well prepared for, and we have had very good cooperation with our Norwegian colleagues, and we will take their experience and learn from their success and from their some of their mistakes, and hope not to copy them. So this is more to prepare our institutions and bureaucracy for what to come.
Does that mean that the Icelandic national company will sort of adapt the Norwegian model for the oil companies? You have mentioned the cooperation.
This is all in the initial stages, but I can say that the way the Norwegians do it, they take or finance the risk by the state funds. Right. I don't see that being the model that we will do. So there's going to be some deviation from the Norwegian model, but we will have to first and foremost look to guard Icelandic interests.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. One last question.
Thank you. My name's Mia Bennett. I'm a student at UCLA in California and the Arctic blogger for the Foreign Policy Association. I had a question for Ambassador Meister. We often think about the Arctic as a model for the rest of the world in certain areas, whether it's energy or the environment and conservation. But I was wondering, having just recently come from New Zealand, do you think there's any parallels you perhaps encountered in your experience with New Zealand vis-a-vis Antarctica and Iceland with regard to the Arctic, maybe in terms of, well, I guess just what your experiences might have been in those two countries? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, indeed, there are quite a few similarities actually between Iceland and New Zealand. I already delivered 2 speeches on similarities between Iceland and New Zealand, and Icelanders and New Zealanders in many, many respects. And some of them also concern the awareness for environmental issues and also for the vicinity of the Antarctic and the Arctic region. So quite indeed, New Zealand plays a foremost role in all Antarctic matters like Iceland in the polar matters. In many respects, you can draw those parallels. If that goes to the point of view
you
made.
Just elaborate perhaps on one of those parallels, that would be interesting.
Sorry?
If you could just elaborate perhaps on one of the parallels you found most captivating.
Well, it's the overall approach that Iceland and New Zealand both take a very strong degree of responsibility when it comes to environmental issues. You might have followed the Camela discussions we had in the 1980s and the 1990s and many other issues related to the Antarctic Treaty. So New Zealand has taken a strong role. Being a small country like Iceland, you always used to say that New Zealand is punching well above its weight in the international fora. That also applies to disarmament issues, human rights. Again, another parallel was Iceland. So quite an area of parallels that you could identify.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you for the questions, and thank you very much to the panel. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. And I'll turn this over to Nils so he can explain the dance for lunch.
Thank you, Drue. And thanks again to our panelists. Please feel free to leave while I wrap up. So I heard a number of common themes from the panelists. I heard themes of security, cooperation, the necessity to balance development with ecosystem health. I also heard a common concern that the benefit of development should be to local communities and to society. I think one of the starting points that each panelist came from was that really the Arctic is home to people and that it is home for many. Also that the second starting point was planet. So really a people and planet approach. I don't think it says that in your policies, but certainly something I can appreciate. The other thing that I guess I heard was that with change comes change. And that's not as brilliant as it sounded in my head. But I hear a lot from many people working on Arctic issues that one area of the Arctic or another is behind. And I think that instead of thinking that we're behind, I think I would encourage us all to be thinking that we're right where we're supposed to be. That we are seeing dramatic changes in the Arctic, especially environmental changes. That we are seeing responses to that change in terms of increasing activity, and that governments are responding. And all of that is happening just as it should be, and that national governments are very cognizant of the changes taking place and the regulatory environment that needs to be then structured based on that change. So I am encouraged by the changes taking place at a government level and within governance. I am going to explain the dance in front of us because I'm going to confuse things. I'm going to send you off on a hero's journey. And for those of you familiar with a hero's journey, this is a challenge in front of each of us that is overcome and that results in hopefully some benefit. And the benefit, of course, is that you eat and eat well. The challenge is that you won't eat here. And how many people here have eaten at a conference center before? Any conference center, probably. Around the Arctic, fairly similar. The goal about being in the Arctic is to experience the Arctic and get out. And as I talked earlier about place-based settings, here we get a chance to experience the wonderful town of Akureyri. So for all of you who have eaten at a conference center, I expect that fewer of you have eaten at Strikid or Brigven or Rub 23, which is where I'm going to send you off to. But I'm going to confuse things because earlier you would have picked up colored lunch tickets for each of these places. And it turns out that people favor either they favor one menu over the other or one speaker over the other. So I'm going to change things, and you might have to reallocate your tickets. And I apologize in advance for some of the confusion this may cause. But so the lunches are set up around sectors. Today's sector is academic. Tomorrow is the support industry, and the third day is non-governmental. So the three academic speakers at each of the lunches today. One is from Apex, and so we'll talk a little bit about emerging researchers, emerging career researchers, and a research agenda for the next generation. That was scheduled for Bryggen, which is, and I'll bring Haldor up to describe where each of these locations are. But Bryggen, Apex, I'm going to change that. That was the blue ticket. That session will now be held at RUB 23. So if you were going to RUB for the COD, I'm going to invite you now to, you can change your tickets on the way out. So blue will be Apex at RUB 23. Session 2, or the other lunch at Stricked will stay the same. So if you have a red ticket, you'll be hearing from Mark Myers, and you'll be going to Stricked and eating chicken breast. And then the third session will be Eagle Thor Nielsen from the Polar Research Institute of China, and that's the white ticket. And that will be at Bryggen. See, I think I confused myself, didn't I? Change the colors? That was good. Okay. If you have any questions, there's 12 staff on hand to help you. Grab your coats on your way out. It is cold. It's not snowing, as it is in Reykjavik, but it is cold. You have an adventure in front of you. There will be worksheets at each of the lunches, so we hope that you'll be commenting on the discussion that takes place. And we'll meet back here at 1 o'clock, so try to break from lunch at 12:45. Be back here, not in this room, but at the Hof at 1 o'clock. And your sessions will be in 3 locations around the Hof. And the next time I will see you in front of here, or the whole group will be at 5:30 at the reception, which is just out here in the little reception area, hosted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Haldor will tell you more about where these locations are.
Okay, if anyone still needs a ticket, there are some tickets at the exit. There are some extra white tickets and some blue ones I saw just a few minutes ago. Bryggen, when you come out front, Bryggen is towards the right or east. In Akureyri, we always talk in directions. So it's towards the east. That's Bryggen. It's an old house. It used to be the sort of the pack house of Akureyri, the first store in Akureyri. So you just take the walkway along the coastline towards the right. RUB 23 is across from Hotel Kea. For those of you who came to the reception last night, it's the red building next to that. So it's on the way up towards the church on the right-hand side. And straight here, there's the tallest building when you come outside and you look towards the downtown. It's the great building that it's 5 levels. That's where you go up to Strikit. So there will be people outside to direct those who are not familiar with the directions. So feel safe. It's a small town.